Good evening. I'm Christine Lowe, Program Co-Chair for the League of Women Voters of Greenwich. On behalf of the League, I'd like to welcome you to a webinar discussion with Garrett Eucalitto, Commissioner of Transportation for the state of Connecticut. The League of Women Voters of Greenwich is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization which works to empower voters. We envision a democracy where every person has the desire, the right, the knowledge, and the ability to participate. The League does not support or oppose any individual candidate for public office. This event is being offered as part of our educational mission to expand voters' understanding of current issues. Connecticut's Department of Transportation is responsible for developing policies and strategic initiatives to provide a safe and efficient transportation network that improves the quality of life and promotes economic vitality for the state and the region. Garrett Eucalitto has been Commissioner of Transportation since January 2023. His previous experience included positions as Deputy Commissioner of CT, Department of Transportation, and Transportation Program Director for the National Governors Association in Washington, D.C. Today's session will consist of an overview presentation by Commissioner Eucalitto, followed by an audience Q&A. Audience questions can be submitted via the Q&A link during the presentation. Christina Broderick, my League of Women Voters Program Co-Chair, Rachel, and I will pose the questions to Commissioner Eucalitto. Before we hand over the presentation to Commissioner Eucalitto, I would like to welcome Rachel Khanna, the State Representative from the 149th District, who serves on the Connecticut Transportation Committee, as well as the Appropriations and the Government Administration and Elections Committees, who will provide some introductory comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris, and good evening. Thank you to the League of Women Voters for hosting this important discussion this evening. I'm the representative for the 149th District of Connecticut, and one of the committees that I serve on is the Transportation Committee, which is very fitting because I think I'm the representative with the longest drive to the state capitol. But actually that experience has been eye-opening for me because I've noticed how fast people drive on our roads, how distracted they are, and how angry. As a matter of fact, this morning I drove up to Hartford and there were 2 accidents, and this was at about 7:30 in the morning. Within Greenwich and Stamford, the 2 towns I represent, there have been too many pedestrian fatalities, which is why in the last session, we were focused on passing a bill that implemented recommendations of the Vision Zero Council. The work of the council is to eliminate transportation-related fatalities and severe injuries involving pedestrians, bicyclists, motorists, passengers, and public transportation users. The bill also addressed wrong-way driving. We hear about it mostly on exit and entry ramps from major highways, and wrong-way driving crashes in Connecticut tripled in 2022. Also, the bill implements speed and red light cameras. It will allow municipalities to use automated traffic and red light cameras to enforce speed control. And this will make roads safer for drivers and pedestrians alike. Particularly important for Greenwich, we passed a bill that had many provisions, including a vegetation management plan, which requires the Department of Transportation to develop and revise guidelines on tree and vegetation management, removal, and replacement along state highways to ensure that we maintain our tree canopy while also mitigating damage from falling trees. The bill also had a noise barrier study, which requires the Department of Transportation to study noise barriers for specific projects and establish a project priority list. In my conversations throughout my district, I've heard a lot of concerns about noise and air pollution along I-95 and other roadways. As a matter of fact, there was an article in the Stamford Advocate recently noting that I-95 is one of the most congested corridors in the US, and the merit is in the top 10. We're also, the bill that I mentioned before also implements decibel level testing. It extends the deadlines for the Department of Motor Vehicles decibel testing implementation plan and requires the DMV to implement a pilot program to test decibel level at emissions inspection stations. For cars traveling at typical speeds on any interstate, which is around 70 miles per hour, sound levels range up to 89 decibels. And for your reference, garbage disposals have 80 decibels and blenders are at 88. So imagine having that at a constant level. Sounds at 85 decibels or higher can lead to hearing loss and have other negative health effects, including stress levels, or increased stress levels, and heart and pulmonary health effects. As far as some of the transportation priorities for the town of Greenwich, a lot of important We have a lot of important and very busy roadways that cross our town. So addressing the safety of these roadways is important, as is ensuring that neighborhoods adjacent to these roadways are protected from noise and poor air quality. According to the American Lung Association, Fairfield County is the most polluted county in the Newark metro area. Another one of our priorities is making our streets safer for pedestrians and bicyclists alike. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Commissioner Eucalitto. I've had the pleasure of working with the commissioner on the Transportation Committee. As Chris mentioned, he became commissioner of the Department of Transportation in 2023 and has the important task of making investments to improve our transportation infrastructure. Commissioner, the floor is yours, and thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Representative Khanna. I appreciate the invitation to be here with the Greenwich League of Women Voters. I want to thank you for all your efforts to in the legislature with the Transportation Committee, pushing for issues that are important to your district. I know you work really closely with all of our staff here at DOT to raise those concerns to our office. So I do have a short presentation to talk a little bit about what the DOT is doing here and what our focus areas are. So pull that slideshow up. Okay, hopefully that is visible. And so I will start the presentation. Connecticut DOT, our focus is on improving safety and mobility. That's really what I've been focused on for the past year I've been in this job. Our vision, when I took the job and started here, took the job a year ago, I had an all-hands meeting with our staff. And for those of you who don't know, we are a pretty large agency. We have over 3,000 employees. Right now, we're on 3,200 employees spread across the entire state. We have 60 different facilities across the state. Our main headquarters is in Newington. And then we have 4 district offices and 45 different garages, and then some satellite facilities. So my focus when I talked to my staff first day on the job was first priority area is going to be safety. Second is accessibility for all users of our system. And the third one is sustainability. I told them it's 2 forms of sustainability. One is fiscal sustainability, making sure we're making the right investments for the right price, things that are going to reduce our long-term maintenance costs, but also environmental sustainability. We have a huge footprint in the state, and we need to make sure we're doing everything we can to protect the environment and provide a sustainable future. So when I talk about improving safety and mobility, there's a few things we're focused on right now. One big area for us is on pedestrian safety. As Representative Khanna mentioned, 2022 was a terrible year for fatalities for pedestrians in our state, over 70 fatalities on our roadways for pedestrians. So we've been making heightened investments in trying to improve crosswalks, more visible crosswalks, ensuring that there is illumination, as well as things you see on the screen here is called rapid rectangular flashing beacons, or RRFBs. So a pedestrian will push the button and a very fast flashing light will alert the drivers that someone's going to be crossing the street. We recently came out with a new complete streets directive for our state agency here at ConnDOT. And what it says is that any project that we do moving forward, entering into design, that is on a state roadway, is going to have to, one, incorporate sidewalks, incorporate crosswalks, and incorporate bike infrastructure in some fashion, depending. There's different options based on the volume of the roadway. But moving forward, every project we do on a state roadway that's not an interstate is going to have to incorporate those features. We've also been pushing forward, helping local governments do things called road diets. So if you have a 2-lane in each direction, a 4-lane road today, maybe you don't need that amount of lane volume today. Maybe you can reduce it and do 1 lane in each direction plus a middle turn lane. And that can help slow down traffic, but still have the same throughput volume through there. We're helping municipal governments with road safety audits, where what we do is we go into the community, state representatives, state senators, chief elected officials for selectmen, or mayors will invite us in, ask us to go walk the actual streets with them. And we'll have consultants and engineers identifying what are the problems here, and how can we fix them. We have a new Safe Routes to School coordinator here at Connecticut DOT. This is a refresh of a position we used to have. It went away for a while when the federal government cut funding for the program. The federal government has returned funding for this, so we have a former teacher who is also an engineer here at DOT, who we just hired in the past year. And she's been going around the state talking to elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, talking to them about how can we do better education about walking and biking and rolling to school, and helping do helmet giveaways, do bike buses where you get a group of people all biking together on their way to school. So if you have any schools that are interested in partnering with us, that is something we're looking to expand across the state. I touched on the complete streets. Another important part, though, of all of our pedestrian infrastructure is ADA accessibility. So our policy is to go and address every single curb ramp across the entire state. There's over 16,000 of them. We need to make sure that every single one of them meets ADA standards for people who have mobility impairments that can safely use those curb ramps, safely cross the street, safely get up on the sidewalk. We've built a new unit here at Connecticut DOT focused just on going and inspecting every curb ramp, and then executing projects to make them all ADA accessible. And the last thing on the screen, we have a grant program, community connectivity grant program, where we invest in local governments to help them make improvements to their infrastructure, to make it safer for people to bike or walk in their community. A lot of those are focused on village centers, downtowns, main streets, where they want to make it more amenable for people to come visit their downtowns. There's been a lot of talk across the state about speed cameras and red light cameras. So just a little background, Connecticut has traditionally not allowed speed cameras or red light cameras. This past legislative session, the Vision Zero Council, which I chair, we recommended to the legislature that they authorize speed cameras and red light cameras. The legislature took this up, passed it, and the DOT on January 2nd issued guidance to municipalities on how they can do this. It's a complete municipal option. It's not a mandate, but every municipality can decide for themselves, is this something I want to do? Do we want to do this for our community? Do we want to do it in our school zones? Do we want to do it in on roadways where there's very fast travel? Do we want to do it at intersections where there's a history of cars going through the red lights and causing crashes? So a municipal government now has the opportunity they have to vote locally, then they send it to us at the DOT. We review the application. We determine, is it an equitable application? Is it spread throughout the community, or is it just targeting one neighborhood? Is there a history of safety issues? That's the most important thing. It has to be data-driven and focused on safety. And the best part, I think, for locals is that all the money collected is kept locally, and it has to go into transportation safety improvements. It can't go towards the general fund. It doesn't go to the state. It's kept locally. One thing that was brought up earlier in the conversation is wrong way driving. This has been a huge problem in Connecticut. It received national attention due to the huge increase in wrong way driving fatalities in our state. In 2022, we had 13 crashes resulting in 23 deaths. And then we had additional crashes on top of that did not result in fatalities, but 23 people died in wrong way crashes in 2022. Thankfully, in 2023, we had a reduction. We had 7 fatalities in 5 crashes, but already this year in 24, we've had 1. So it's any loss of life as a result of this type of crash is completely unacceptable, and it's preventable. It's almost entirely caused by drunk drivers. Back in 2022, when we looked at the numbers, Of all the fatalities, every single driver who was tested after their death had a blood alcohol concentration of over 0.08, so they were legally intoxicated. And then half of those also have drugs in their system. So alcohol is present in most every single person who's doing wrong way driving, and many of them also have drugs in their system. With drugs, it's very difficult to tell if that is causing them to be impaired. It doesn't react in the body the same way as alcohol, but we know they were drunk when they caused these crashes. So what have we been doing? Thankfully, the legislature has invested heavily in this issue. They have given us $20 million to invest in wrong way driving countermeasures. So we have wrong way flashing detection systems now installed at ramps across the state. We have had ads up on TV and on radio raising awareness for people to be on the lookout and to be careful, and to really stress how painful and this type of crash is to the community. And we also have pavement markings, directional arrows, and we're really focused on doing this as many as we can across the entire state. Our goal, the legislative target, is over 220 ramps that we want to do over the life of this project over the next few years. So we do have some in the Greenwich area that we're planning to install these flashers on the Merritt exit 31 and on I-95 and exit 5. We're planning to install some flashers at those locations. So I want to hopefully show this video. Let's hopefully it runs. Let's see. This is a video of it's the video that caught when someone's coming up the wrong way and the flasher comes on, the lights come on, it begins, the driver immediately corrects when those flashers come on and turns around. If that wrong way detection system with those lights had not been there, the likelihood is that driver would have continued onto the ramp and gotten onto the highway going the wrong direction. This was 3:40 in the morning in Meriden on December 18th. And then you can see they turned around and now they're going the correct way up the highway ramp. So moving away from rubber wheels to move over to the rail. I know that rail transportation is critical to Greenwich, it's critical to Fairfield County, and it's growing in importance throughout the state. The Hartford line, which runs from New Haven to Hartford to Springfield with stops in between, is growing in leaps and bounds. But nothing compares to the New Haven line, which is still the second busiest commuter railroad in the country, the first being the Long Island Railroad. So right now, today, as we sit here, ridership on the New Haven line is hovering around 70% of pre-pandemic levels. We know from the ridership data that we get that Mondays are a little bit lower than Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday are still the peak days of traffic on the New Haven line. Fridays are still much lower than Monday through Thursday. Weekends, though, weekend ridership is at or above pre-pandemic levels on weekend ridership. This past legislative session, there was budget changes that did some slight adjustments to rail schedules. On the New Haven line, the initial budget called for around a 14% reduction in service on the New Haven line and on the Shoreline East. We at the DOT looked at that. We worked really closely with Metro North, and we did a very targeted, almost surgical adjustment to the schedule. On Monday through Thursday, only 2 trains were eliminated out of the entire schedule. And those trains that were eliminated had a train departing either right before or right after. So for the average commuter, they hopefully have not seen any impact Monday through Thursday. On Fridays, to address the ridership reduction on Fridays, a total of 8 trains were eliminated from the schedule. Again, we haven't seen an impact on actual ridership, and we have not been receiving any complaints on those service adjustments. Again, it was focused on where is there a train a little bit before or a little bit after that can accommodate those passengers, around 15-minute on either side. There was a slight fare increase I know fare increases are never a positive thing for the riders, but we haven't increased fares since 2019, and the costs to run the service have increased significantly with new labor agreements in place for the conductors, for the engineers, as well as the fact that there's fewer riders means we're taking in less fare box revenue to support the service. But long term, we know Connecticut's future depends on rail. So we are working really closely on a whole host of rail projects. The Governor Lamont rolled out as one of his signature initiatives. It's called the TIME program, Time for CT, track improvements for mobility enhancements, because transportation loves acronyms. And it's focused on a multi-billion-dollar investment program on the railroad. And we had buy-in and support from the federal government on the side. Most recently, late last year, Connecticut DOT received over $1.2 billion to invest in our railroad, focused on track improvements as well as some of our movable rail bridges. And that's going to lead to major improvements for all of Connecticut's railroad from the Greenwich border all the way to New Haven. But New York is getting significant investments as well. We are going to see major improvements on the New Haven line on the New York side of the border. Penn Station access is proceeding, which means that New Haven line customers will now be able to get access into Penn Station, hopefully beginning in 2027 or 2028, when that project is completed. They're building 4 additional stations in the Bronx, which we in Connecticut think is important because it's going to open up another opportunity for passengers to get from New York, from the Bronx into Connecticut to a lot of our jobs. And it's going to allow us to get into Penn Station, giving us 2 access points into the city. The other point is, I know Greenwich Station, we're working really closely with the owners there at the station to partner with them as they proceed with their station renovation project. I've seen some renderings. It looks beautiful. We're trying to align. We are going to do major improvements to the platforms as well. That will come a little bit after their station project kicks off, but fully replace those platforms, canopy improvements, replacing that pedestrian overpass, which I think everyone wants to see replaced, and upgrade some amenities at the station. On the bus side, so back to the rubber wheels, we are working on investing in bus service expansion across the state, including in the Stamford region. We have a bus garage in Stamford that serves the region down in Lower Fairfield County. We're investing in battery electric buses to serve the Stamford region as well as the entire state. New bus rapid transit in New Haven, but we're looking at, can we do bus rapid transit or bus only lanes on some of our congested corridors? Replacing a lot of the bus stops to make them more usable for people, have some seating, lighting, a real-time arrival signage, provide them with some additional amenities that they deserve, as well as some microtransit pilots. So on-call, it's a public sector Uber or Lyft, essentially, on-call buses that are more cost-effective for some more suburban areas. Electric vehicles. So Connecticut DOT has a little bit of a role here in the electric vehicle space. Under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or the bipartisan infrastructure law, Connecticut is receiving $52 million in national electric vehicle infrastructure called NEVI program. The first round of funding that we are going to be issuing an RFP for private sector partners to invest in that infrastructure is going to go out hopefully this week or next week. And it's going to be focused on the major highways. So how do we invest in EV charging infrastructure along our major highway corridors? Once we fill the gaps on all of our major highways, so that's I-95, I-84, I-91, 395 out in Eastern Connecticut, as well as the Merritt Parkway, then we can invest the additional money, probably a little over $30 million in community-based charging. So have some more, and these are all fast chargers. It's not level 2 chargers. So they're the ones that can charge your, Hyundai or your Tesla or Ford Mustang Mach-E in 15, 20 minutes, not several hours. And so that's something that we're going to be investing in. We're partnering with our sister agencies on that front. Some local projects to flag for you all. So we have a project called Local Transportation Capital Improvement Program called LOTSIP. That's state money that the governor and the legislature provide to DOT to invest in local projects. So over the last 10 years, there's been around just under $7 million of LOTSIP funds for Greenwich. And there's an additional $7 million in the pipeline going to Greenwich for local projects. So part of those are the Sound Beach Avenue Bridge replacement that was completed a couple years ago. There's additional projects on Davis Avenue Bridge replacement that was completed. There's some intersection improvement projects. There's a North Street Bridge over West Brothers Brook. There's some Route 1 sidewalk improvement projects as well that's going to be kicking off that we're going to commit to fund that project locally. And then there's some other major projects on I-95 pavement conditions to repair the pavement there. And then one thing that Governor Lamont and I talk quite a bit about that he gets really interested in is adaptive traffic signals. So one thing we're going to be partnering with the town of Greenwich on is on Route 1, how do we upgrade all those traffic signals to make it adaptive? So those traffic signals will be on the fly adapting to the traffic conditions. So it will know when traffic's backing up in each direction. So it will immediately try to pivot the signal phase and timing to make traffic flow a little more smoothly and not make you wait there. There used to be these loops in the ground that would detect whether a car was there. Now it's all above ground. It's in the sky on the traffic mast arms, and it can detect from far away where the traffic is coming, and they communicate with each other up and down the corridor. So it'll make for a smoother traffic throughout the Route 1 corridor. We also have a major project. It's a study that's going to be kicking off looking at I-95 in Greenwich from the New York border all the way up to Stamford exit 7. This is something that is going to be a in-depth effort to look at the entirety of that corridor, also looking up to Route 1, everything in between there, looking at local improvements that are possible, improvements on Route 1, improvements on I-95, and it's going to be a community conversation. It's going to be very locally driven. So that is something that is really critical to continue to get engagement. I know my team from Connecticut DOT is going to be coming down for a community conversation and presentation on Thursday of this week. And there'll be many more of those conversations to come. We did a similar type of PEL, stands for Project Environmental Linkage. It's essentially a federal planning study. And we did a similar one for Hartford recently. We just completed. It was a 3-year effort, and I identified 60 plus projects that we are aiming to do in the greater Hartford region. And so this project in Greenwich is really focused on throughout this I-95 corridor in Greenwich, not just focus on the highway, but what else can we do to improve all transportation and traffic here through Greenwich from I-95 up to Route 1. And I think, oh, yeah, I just said all of this basically, but the goal is to, by the end of 2025, have that study wrapped up. We'll be able to have a list of projects that can advance. Some of them can move sooner. Some of them are going to take a little bit longer. But that way we can have a roadmap of where we need to go to improve mobility in Greenwich for the community. And one issue I know there'll be questions on noise barriers. This is something that we have an entire team here at Connecticut DOT focused on. So we know that the transportation system causes significant noise impacts. We have every single project that we do is screened for whether it triggers what's called a type 1 noise study. And there's a whole bunch of criteria that if you're adding capacity at a certain level, adding a lane, that would trigger a type 1 noise study. Other types of projects we do, if they don't hit those federal thresholds, then that's called a type 2 project, a type 2 noise study. And Representative Khanna mentioned this earlier as part of some of her legislative focus. That noise study Connecticut DOT has been working really intensely on that. We will be submitting that to the legislature in the coming weeks. It's a really in-depth look at the entirety of the state transportation system, looking at how can we do a type 2 noise study, a type 2 noise program here in Connecticut, which means using federal funds for projects that are not don't hit those thresholds, and it tiers them out. And it also lays out, if you want to use state funds, how could you do that? So appreciate the direction the legislature gave to us to focus on that, but also the vegetation management program. So I think there is, we do a lot of work on vegetation management at Connecticut DOT. We've had many people die as a result of trees falling onto cars, or people crashing into cars. But there's also a lot of thought about, if you remove those trees, what's the impact on noise? And in some cases there is, and in some cases there is not, but it is often a psychological impact for the residents, and we know that. So with that, I'm going to wrap up and turn it over to everyone else so we can do some questions.
Thank you so much for that presentation. You actually hit on so many of the questions that had come in advance. So really, really appreciate it, how thorough that was. I know that there are going to be some deeper dives with the questions coming in. And one of those has to do with some of the bridge replacements that you are doing throughout Greenwich, in particular, one that's going to take place on Route 1 in the next year or so on our 4-lane road, and potentially, shutting off a really busy throughway there.
Yeah.
The question is, what is your role, or what is Connecticut DOT's responsibility on this project? Does it include traffic mitigation and planning for that? Yeah,
so anytime we do a construction project, if it's a state managed project, and I know there's a few projects on Route 1, so it depends which one, but if it's a state managed project, if our construction staff is administering it and managing that project, we work with the local government in advance, well in advance before that project kicks off, and we develop a traffic mitigation plan. So we lay out in advance, working with the local government, here's the construction schedule, and then we start talking about, are there priority dates that the local government knows where there's a large community event? Is there going to be a very important football game going on in the high schools nearby, right? Like those types of things that we want to make sure to avoid doing things that are going to really throttle traffic at those certain times. We also work on, are there certain times of day that are key for the community to try and keep clear? Can we do some night work? Night work is always easier for traffic, but if it's near residences, yeah, that's a negative impact for those residents that live near that night work. So we do work up with a traffic mitigation plan with the community, not just local government, but if there's community groups, civic organizations that are engaged as well, major employers in that area, to try and ensure that we're working with them. And we basically assign staff from each district. So this would be District 3. They're assigned to work directly on that project. That's their project. The local government has their cell phone, talks to them every day, and works with the local police as well.
Okay, terrific. We have a number of questions coming in relating to ADA compliance. How do we make sure that sidewalks are at least 3 feet wide and the utility poles are removed and other obstacles are taken away from the sidewalk? A question about bus shelters on the post road, and also the Greenwich train station, and elevator access and so forth. Any comments on those, please?
Yeah, that is really important for us. We want to make sure the transportation system serves everyone equally. So, we are going in now and looking at, like I mentioned, every single curb ramp to ensure that they are all ADA accessible. Sidewalks are a little bit of a different beast. Sidewalks are when the state installs them, if some of them were installed 30 years ago, 40 years ago, the trees that are adjacent to them are now, the roots are pushing up some of the sidewalk, right? So sidewalks are a local government responsibility for maintenance. So we will pay to install them. Then we hand them off to local government. In some communities, the responsibility falls to the abutting property owner for snow clearance, or it depends on the local government. But we do have funding availability to help support local governments to do sidewalk replacements, maintenance, because we do want to make sure the sidewalks that are installed are passable. They should be wider than 3 feet. They have to accommodate someone in a motorized wheelchair, or allow bidirectional traffic. So that's important. That's what we're going to be doing. We have something called design criteria that local governments have to adhere to. Everyone in our team adheres to. Local governments have to adhere to it. Private contractors have to adhere to it. So if they're going to do a project on our roadways, they have to follow our design standards. So wide sidewalks, lighting, no utility poles in the middle of the sidewalk. It can be to the edge, but you have to accommodate that in the width. So that's really important for us. At the train stations now, we are focused on every train station has to be ADA accessible. We still have several that are not, but we've received some grant funding to make ADA improvements at those. For instance, on the Waterbury branch line, where it goes like basically Bridgeport up to Waterbury, most of those were not ADA accessible. So we are doing a major construction project to make every single one of those have ADA ramps, or in some cases elevators, to serve those stations.
We also have had a number of questions come in about the rail, and just to touch on a couple of them. One's asking about how you can reduce the amount of time on the rail. So currently it takes 3 hours to travel from Stanford to Hartford. How can you reduce that to make it, at least comparable with driving? Another is questioning if a renovation is scheduled for the Riverside train station, and if so, when is that to start? And there's another one, but I'm missing that, so I'm going to let you touch on those.
Governor Lamont, every time I meet with him, it's usually, how much faster are the trains going today? His focus has been, how can we speed up rail travel in Connecticut and make the trains competitive with driving? That has been something that's been a problem in Connecticut, especially following the derailment, over a decade ago. The Federal Railroad Administration came in and reduced the speeds on our rails for safety reasons. We've been working really closely with Metro North and investing state dollars to make the improvements to the rail to improve our speeds. As we make these capital improvements, the multi-billion-dollar investment program that the governor has kicked off, called Time for CT, those improvements on not just the movable bridges, but a lot of what we don't even think of as a bridge, but it's a bridge over a roadway, right? We call those undergrade bridges. As we upgrade all of those, that actually will speed up the travel speed throughout the corridor, in some cases allowing the trains to get up to 90 miles per hour through some portions. One project that we're working on right now in the Bridgeport and Stratford region, we'll be able to increase speeds through that region, a few miles region, from 70 miles per hour to 90 miles per hour. So every single little foot we do on the rail corridor is going to slowly allow us to increase speeds throughout that corridor. On the Hartford line piece, that is something we now have some federal funds to completely double track that corridor. We're getting new rail cars in a couple of years there on the Hartford line. If you're a frequent user of the New Haven line, then you go take a train ride on the Hartford line, you feel like you're going back in time, because we have rail cars from like the 60s and 70s there compared to the M8s we have on the New Haven line. So we have new rail cars coming for the Hartford line, which will have higher travel speeds. And then we also are working with Amtrak to try and get more Northeast regional Amtrak trains going from Boston to Springfield to Hartford to New Haven down to New York, which will inversely allow even more frequency at higher speeds from Lower Fairfield County up to Hartford to Springfield more frequently. The goal of Amtrak is to do that trip, what they call inland route. They want to do it hourly. in the next 15 years or so. They want to move to an hourly time clock schedule there.
Right. Here's a question about electric vehicles. They are considerably heavier in weight than gasoline-powered vehicles. How will this impact our roads and highways?
Great question. So there's a few impacts there. So we're looking at what's the impact on our pavements, on our concrete. For right now, the general consensus from all the research, I was just at 2 weeks ago, I was at a week-long conference in DC called Transportation Research Board, and there's 15,000 people from all across the world that come in, and they have 3,000 different sessions to choose from on research panels and topics. And a lot of talk about Secretary Buttigieg actually led a panel on pavement conditions and new pavement technology, because he's a nerd like I am. So it does impact what type of materials we're using. So we are looking at right now, thankfully, the vehicles, electric vehicles, sedans, and light duty trucks are not heavier. They're still not heavier than our 28,000 pound tractor trailers that are on our roads. So we build all of our roads to be able to accommodate tractor trailers. We use the concrete base plus an asphalt top to accommodate the heaviest trucks that are out there today. The big concern for us is going to be if those trucks begin to electrify, if those long haul tractor trailers begin to electrify, those batteries are going to be immensely heavy. Our pavement that we currently use in Connecticut cannot accommodate that. Our bridges definitely cannot accommodate that. So that's where we're in discussions with the industry. Is that really the direction you're going to head? Because we need to start planning for that. And so there's still uncertainty there. But the other piece on the weight of the vehicles is as vehicles are becoming more heavy, they're becoming larger, they're becoming more heavy. If they strike a pedestrian in a crosswalk on a roadway, it's more likely that pedestrian will die as a result. So that's something that's the unintended consequence of investing in electric vehicles, which is critically important for air quality for us, right? We are considered the tailpipe of the nation. Anything we can do to clean up our air quality in Connecticut is important, but we need to, at the same time, be investing in crosswalks, sidewalks, bike lanes to protect what we call vulnerable road users as well.
We had a number of questions about financial planning for these infrastructure improvements. One of them was asking, will Connecticut consider joining other states around the country in setting up an infrastructure bank? Could this help us have an alternate source of funding for infrastructure improvements during periods of tighter budgets? What do you see as the main impediments to do this? And there were also questions about, reducing gas tax revenues and, changing technology for collecting tolls. So if you could touch on those.
Yeah, infrastructure bank's an interesting concept. It's used by many other states. I think for Connecticut, we rely almost entirely on bonding to support our capital investments on transportation. And then annually, we pay the debt service out of our special transportation fund. So the special transportation fund, it's funded by gas tax, diesel tax, and a portion of the sales tax. Historically, it was largely funded by gas tax, diesel tax, and what's called the oil companies tax, basically the gross receipts tax off of petroleum products. That still goes in there as well. New car sales tax, used car sales tax. Over time, as the gas tax is flatlined, the diesel tax is flatlined, Connecticut has been putting more and more sales tax into our transportation fund. So a large portion of our transportation system now is funded out of the general sales tax from the state. It's not only supported by using of our cars and buses or cars and trucks. So for us, I think an infrastructure bank is a fascinating idea to especially support a lot of the local governments who don't have funding to match a lot of the federal grants that are available today. So what we've heard a lot from a lot of local governments is, I want to apply for this $20 million grant to do this major infrastructure project, but I can't come up with the 20% match I need. That's where an infrastructure bank, I think, could be critically helpful, is to vet those types of applications and lend at a very below treasury rate, like low interest loan, to support those local governments in that effort. That's where I've seen a few other states are leading that way of using their infrastructure banks to support local governments. The future of transportation funding in Connecticut is going to have to be addressed in the next probably 5 to 10 years for sure, because as we move towards an electrified future, today, electric vehicles do not contribute to the special transportation fund other than their annual or their registration. They pay for the car registration. So they don't pay a gas tax or any form of additional tax for usage of the roadways. So that is something that Connecticut is going to need to address. Other states across the country are doing that through different pilots. Some of them use what's called a mileage-based user fee or road use charge, where you are charged based on how many miles you travel in a quarter or a year. And that is billed to you. So that's what Virginia, Utah, California, Washington State, Oregon are all moving towards.
Related to that question, with technology well advanced to collect tolls electronically, will Connecticut introduce electronic tolls to help pay for the excessive truck traffic that tends to pass through the state?
So this is something, it's been a perennial discussion in Connecticut. So I worked in Connecticut from 2013 to 2017 in the state budget office. And this was a thing that we really looked at strongly under Governor Malloy. We weren't able to get it done. Governor Lamont made this a top priority of his as well. And it was not taken up in the legislature. So I think the ship has sailed on that for now. Governor Lamont did get a highway use fee in place targeting heavy trucks that are doing damage to our roadways. So that is in place today. So a truck, a Class 8 truck and above, basically tractor trailers and above, now have to pay a fee to the state based on how many miles they're traveling and what the average weight of that vehicle is. So that is capturing a little bit of the truck traffic based on the weight of the vehicle, because the heavier the weight, the more damage they're doing to our roadways. But I think for now, I don't see any appetite in the state capital to readdress the tolls debate.
I'm going to go back to the renovation of train stations, because we have sort of two questions on this. One is, in what way can the state assist or help fund the renovation of a privately owned train station in Greenwich? And the other one was referring back to the Riverside train station and when that is scheduled for renovation. If you could touch on
that. Riverside, I don't know. So I can follow up after this tomorrow morning and send something out to the league if you want to share or someone can just email me directly. It's my first name last name at ct.gov, or Representative Khanna can connect us and I can answer that question. We do have a list of every train station and where they are on the schedule. I just don't have that one off the top of my head. Private train stations, so we have some kind of role. So Greenwich Station is privately owned. There's an agreement in place between us and the owners where there's certain rights of access. They have to maintain that public access to reach the platforms. Our job is to cover the platforms, the pedestrian overpass. They cover essentially the building itself. So they have plans to do those improvements and renovations. We're working with them, ensuring close cooperation between us and Metro North, because in order for them to do their construction project there, they need to partner with Metro North to ensure Metro North has what's called flaggers or protective services in place if any work is going to be done close to the railroad. And then we're trying to align our platform renovation project and pedestrian overpass project to align with their schedule. It's going to be a little bit after, but it's trying to align in that space.
Okay. Question about 95, and some of the work there. What will it take for 95 to be a candidate for paving with materials to lower the sound volume from loud traffic?
Great question. So the current project we have, I'm trying to remember, we are going to be testing some new pavement type on the pavement, the resurfacing project we're doing on I-95. So, the project that we're going to be kicking off this year is going to be using some new pavement types that we've never used in Connecticut before. So it's going to be a test, and it's intended to have a beneficial impact on sound. So the two types are, it's called binder rich intermediate coarse and stone matrix asphalt. So I had to look at my notes for that. I'm not an engineer, but we've never used that in Connecticut before. But what we've heard from other states is there is some benefit to reducing sound impact from vehicles passing over those types of mix. And so this is going to be a pilot test for us. The first place we're going to do it in the state is in Greenwich, and we're going to see how it works and what the impact is on the sound there. And we're really hopeful that it's going to not only reduce sound, but also hold up to the heavy volume of traffic that Greenwich has compared to other parts of the state.
So I'm sorry, when would that be you say it's the first place in Greenwich?
Yeah, so we'll be starting that in the spring, actually, this spring. So we'll start the resurfacing project this spring. It should be completed by fall of 25.
Okay.
Great. This question's a little bit of a long one, so bear with me while I read it. But various agencies long ago documented safety and operational issues with Route 1 here in Greenwich, our only urban east-west through street. WestCog's predecessor developed a plan in 2010, and in 2018, Connecticut DOT completed a road safety audit that cited many of the same issues. Given that your new Complete Streets Design Directive only applies to projects initiated after September 1st, 2023, how soon can we get some relief for such long-standing problems to such an important road as Route 1 here?
That's a great question. So I can say you don't need to wait until a major project to make some improvements. There's a lot of things we can do in the short term. If there are identified improvements that the town wants to make, we can start having those conversations. It always needs to be a partnership between the DOT and the local government. That's critical for us because they're the ones that are going to need to basically live with it, right? The last thing we want to do is come in and do a project that the community objects to, that the local government doesn't want, because they're going to be the ones responding every single day to things occurring on the roadways. So if there are clearly defined improvements that can be made, we can start working with the legislative delegation, with the first selectman, and the local leadership to start addressing those. The Pell study that we're going to be doing, that's kicking off now in 2 days from now as well, and that's going to be an opportunity to identify really specific what are the problems that need to be addressed in Greenwich for mobility. Route 1 is going to be a major focus of that, and that will come out with what are called early action projects that we could kick off in the next few years before any highway projects get completed. But if there are things that I guess it was SWRPA did, right, the Southwest Regional Planning Agency, if they identified we need to do some improvements at this intersection or that intersection, that's where we can start working with local government to say, okay, this is an issue. And then what we do is we work with the local government, and then we work with WestCog to get it added to what's called a Transportation Improvement Program, or a TIP. So that means they identified that as a priority project that they want to have federal funds assigned to, and then it rolls up to us and we program that for funding. So we can't do, there's this perception out there that we just pick and choose what projects to do, but in reality, for anything to be funded and progressed with federal funds, we need local approval to do that, because the MPOs, Metropolitan Planning Organizations, which are essentially the COGs, they have to sign off on every project we do in the state that uses federal funds. So it really is a partnership. and a great back and forth that we have with the COGs, with local governments, to ensure that we're addressing their priorities.
So here's a question about vegetation management. It says the premature mortality increases in neighborhoods that lose trees, and it decreases in neighborhoods that have lots of mature trees. Thus, potentially more deaths could be caused when the trees are cleared than would be saved by not having trees falling on vehicles. Any comment on, on vegetation management and how it plays into your plans?
Yeah, so it's an important balance for us. We don't want to come in and remove anything that doesn't have to be removed. For instance, on the Merritt Parkway, it's historic. The aesthetics of it are really critically important for users of the roadway, for history. But what we've seen is a lot of the trees have been decimated by some of the invasive pests and species. So that has been, we work really closely with the Merritt Parkway Conservancy on what's the right mix of trees that can be placed there. The trees are going to age, and at some point they're going to have to be taken down and replaced. And that's where we're partnering with them right now. And a few of the projects up and down the Merritt is, okay, we had to take down these trees to do this project. Now what are we replacing them with? And so it's a good back and forth between our engineers and the Conservancy to address that. And so as we're looking at our entire transportation system, what are the appropriate trees to place in this? What's the appropriate cover to have here? We want to make sure it's not something that's going to fall onto the roadway, but there could be vegetation there that is appropriate and can screen the community, provide that filtration for the air. So our vegetation management guidelines that we're going to be issuing in the next week or two, I think will show that balance. And I'm sure legislators are going to be asking us lots of questions about that when we release it.
I know we're getting really close to your time. We just have so many more questions now. You're popular. But I'm gonna give the last one here, just to be respectful. This one's a specific one about noise. To bring noise within federal guidelines, when might we expect sound barriers on the bridge over the Mianus River? Perhaps the plexiglass barriers used in other parts of the state?
So today, that's a great question. So today we can't just go in and do that, right? Because that wouldn't be what's called the Type 1 project, because we're not doing a project on the Mianus River Bridge today that's building a new highway, altering it substantially, vertically or horizontally, altering that highway. We're not adding through lanes. We're not adding an auxiliary lane that's in excess of 2,500 feet. Or relocating lanes and ramps. So we can't go in and do that today. What may lead to that is the Pell that we're doing. That's the study that's being kicked off now, looking at what are the major improvements we need to do to I-95, to Route 1, to local roadway to improve mobility. The results of that Pell study are probably going to recommend major adjustments to I-95, to Route 1, to some of the ramps, to some of we are going to have to do something with the bridge in the future, right? I mean, every bridge is going to need major improvements, due to aging. It's in great condition now, but, at some point it's going to need major work. So as the Pell study concludes, it's probably going to identify some projects that will trigger what's called the Type 1 project. And that would allow us to be able to use to do that Type 1 noise study to determine whether the barriers are feasible. I think on a bridge like that, the plexiglass probably is the appropriate one, right? You want to have the visibility to the beautiful view shed there. So if a Type 1 noise study is warranted in that case, and then it identifies, yes, noise barriers are appropriate in this location, then I think, not being the engineer, I would recommend to my staff, you got to use the plexiglass ones in this location. We're not putting up cement or wood sound barriers on the bridge.
Okay, great. So I think that was our last question, and this concludes our this evening's discussion. Thank you so much to you, Commissioner Eucalitto, and thank you also, Rachel, Representative Khanna, for you sharing your thoughts and perspective. We really, really appreciate your time this evening. We appreciate everybody for joining us this evening, and we hope to see you at future League of Women Voters events. Thank you all, and thank you, and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.